Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters Encounters video. While I'm waiting for your new suggestions on the all new playlist that I'm starting soon, I thought I would feature yet another scary Skinwalker experience here. Once again, coming from the Reddit.com website, they're from the subreddit called Skinwalkers. This one really creepy. I did like the way that the user was able to write things in a way where in your mind it was almost playing out like a movie itself. You'll know about here more in a minute. But it comes from a user by the name of Weed for Life, and their case, they titled their creepy encounter as Encounter While Hunting. You're going to definitely get some shivers on your body whenever you see this experience. I know I would when it comes to feeling and seeing something like this out there in the forest and having no clue as to essentially what this is, or powerless to basically do anything about it. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that encounter here, and then I'll give my own thoughts and opinions on it afterward. So here's what they stated. I have a story of a creature on my hunting land from when I was a kid. When I was about 10 years old, I was hunting with my grandfather, now deceased, on a family-owned land near Covington, Michigan. It was near dusk, and we've been sitting for a couple of hours now. We haven't seen just much, and a small doe and a spiker, but nothing large enough to shoot. And so we were starting to lose hope, and we're getting ready to start that about 1 mile trek back to our cabin. As we were preparing to leave, we heard some twigs cracking from our right rear side. The stand we were in was tucked in the rear corner of a large clearing on one of the bigger trees in the tree line. As those cracks from those twigs got closer, I remember realizing that all other ambient noises stopped. And when the creature finally emerged from the tree line, I remember my heart feeling like it stopped working, and an overwhelming feeling of dread washed over me. What I saw was what looked to be a small buck that looked like it hadn't eaten in weeks and was an extremely pale brown, almost gray, with what looked like a broken neck and a missing antler, stumble into the clearing. At this time, the sun was just about to sink below the treetops and cover the clearing with shadows. I recall looking over at my grandfather and seeing a level of fear I have never seen on his face before. Mind you, my grandfather was tough and fearless as they come, seeing as that he had active duty in Vietnam as an infantryman. After seeing my grandfather's face, it just made the feeling in my stomach become worse. As we watched this quote-unquote deer stumble into the clearing my grandfather reached, and then what happened afterwards is he reached for his binoculars, and as he pulled them out, the lens cover made a very small noise right on the side of the stand. And so the creature must have heard it because it stopped its stumble. In fact, it was now in the middle of the clearing, and then creepily rotated around, rose up on its hind legs, and then stared directly at us for about a minute before running off in a creepily awkward sprint into the woods. At this time, it felt like I had just gotten the wind knocked out of me, and I was petrified with fear. After the encounter, me and my grandfather sat in the stand completely silent, staring at that clearing, trying to make sense of what we just witnessed. As we started to walk back, we heard extremely weird, almost human-sounding noises coming from the woods around us. By the time we got back to the cabin, my grandfather decided it'd be best to call our trip early and head back home. But before we left, I had to use the bathroom, and our cabin was quite old, so I didn't have indoor plumbing, just an old outhouse. As I sat down to use the toilet, the immense feeling of dread returned as I heard human-like whispers and small scratches on the back of the outhouse. I screamed at the top of my lungs to my grandfather as I ran out of the outhouse crying. After that, we drove back home and had a small discussion about what we saw. Despite being an avid hunter, that was my grandfather's last season of hunting, and about a year later, we sold that land. I've told this story a couple of times to close friends and family, but I think most of them think I'm crazy, especially being the only witness now that my grandfather passed away. Still, to this day, the encounter sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. then that's it. That's pretty much everything that the user, Weed for Life, mentioned in their experience. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that here. Wasn't that, again, just a very frightful play of the mind whenever you were initially reading it and then wondering like what the user was experiencing, wondering how overwhelming in fear that must have been because of how they presented this story. Finally, too, we have a location, in this case, Covington, Michigan. You know how I mentioned in some of the other videos that there's always like a lack of a location, but now we have one here. So those of you out there in Covington, Michigan, let me know. Do y'all have like skinwalkers? Do y'all have much encounters with them out there? Let me know what the history on that there is too. But what about the description of the skinwalker? Freaky, right? Here you have something that looked completely emaciated. It was also smallish in size and stature. It had this extremely pale brown look to it. I think the most creepiest part, though, was that broken neck. I mean, you could just imagine something like that shouldn't be alive and shouldn't be moving about, and yet there it was. It had a clearly broken leg, almost like in a Silent Hill manner, and there was stumbling out there in the clearings. And then, of course, just like a movie turn, this thing heard that they were making a noise and then slowly but surely faced in their direction. And the way it just jaunted off as if it was sprinting on hind legs all of a sudden, I would definitely be out of there in no time, and I wouldn't even stay the night. It was pretty good for them to be able to do so, to get out of there early. I would have gone there even earlier and not have stayed there right afterward. Another thing that stood out was those human-sounding noises that the user mentioned coming from the woods after that encounter, and then, of course, clearing things out with whatever that thing was that was behind the outhouse. Now directly knowing that the user was there, and it was totally just frightening the heck out of that user with more noises. So definitely in their case, they were out of there. One thing this story reminded me of was that brief mention about the grandfather, how he was tough as nails, like he was there in Vietnam. He was in the infantry. Tough and fearless is what they described. And yet the grandfather's face after seeing this thing, it must have been shocking, not just to see this thing, but to see the look on the grandfather's face and realize this is the very first time that they have 100% just pure fear. It reminded me of that story that I heard from someone. Their coworker's dad, so in other words, not that coworker, but the dad that the coworker had, them and their buddies went on some trip. It was somewhere here in Texas. I have no idea where it was because they kept it such a secret. But they went hunting. Same thing as what this story had. They went hunting. These are all manly men, the kind of men that you would see with those big trucks and those jeans and then the rifles and so on. They were out there hunting. And then lo and behold, they saw something. That dad has never told the coworker, i.e. the daughter, what they saw. They've pretty much taken it to their grave, but they said they saw something out there in the woods that immediately caused them to run away. Like this was the most scariest thing they have ever seen. And it caused them to run away, and they all swore to each other they would never, ever tell anyone what they saw. It was nothing criminal. Like it was more on the lines of this story involving the Skinwalker, that kind of stuff. Again, these are men that would have nothing to scare them, but here they were running out from the forest, so creeped out. And the way the father described it too, that they never really believed in God, but now they did after they saw this thing, whatever it was, because the idea is whatever this thing was in the woods, if it wasn't God, if it was something else truly evil, then that means that God has to exist because of the dualities. But that's essentially what that user stated, what that daughter stated, and the father has been asked, and then he's never ever told anyone about that stuff. Never will, apparently, too. But in any case, that reminded me of that story. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.